Imagine this: a daughter's hand resting on her mother's shoulder, soft as a blessing, while inside her head she's already counting the insurance money and picturing the funeral flowers. Imagine that same hand, an hour later, striking a road flare and rolling it across the heart pine floor she learned to walk on. Imagine the mother, still breathing, still watching, hidden in the dark, knowing the worst truth a parent can ever know: the child you sang to sleep is the one holding the match. That really happened in Savannah, Georgia, in the fall of 2018. Before we continue, take a moment to share where you're listening from and subscribe to the Ageless Bold Stories channel. I truly love seeing our stories reach across so many places and hearts. Together, we're creating a space where every season of life still holds its own wonder, its own turning point. Now, let's ease ourselves back into the story. The air in Savannah that summer hung so thick you could stir it with a spoon. Spanish moss dripped from the live oaks like wet, slow and grey, and the river smelled of pluff mud and secrets. Eleanor Voss was 62, still tall, still auburn-haired if you caught her in the right light, and still walking the 3 blocks from her shop on Broughton Street to the pale blue Victorian on East Jones every evening at 6 sharp. Locals called the house Captain's Folly, because her husband Tom had spent 25 years restoring every spindle and floorboard by hand before cancer took him in 2011. Eleanor kept the porch light on for him out of habit, the same way some widows set an extra place at the table. Most afternoons she unlocked the wrought iron gate, stepped over the brick path Tom had laid the year their daughter Lauren was born, and felt the house settle around her like an old dog. Happy its person was home, she'd hum something half-remembered, maybe Patsy Cline, maybe just the tune of their first dance, set her keys in the porcelain dish shaped like a magnolia blossom, and start supper. Simple things: shrimp simmering in butter, okra frying, cornbread sliding golden from the iron skillet. The smell drifted out the open windows and down the street, and neighbours would wave and call, "Evening, Miss Eleanor, save me a piece." But that summer of 2018, the smell changed. It started with the hugs that lasted too long. Lauren, 41, twice divorced, beautiful, the way a cracked mirror is still beautiful, began showing up unannounced 3-4 times a week. She breezed through the screen door in loud sandals and louder perfume, arms already open. "Mama, you look tired," she'd sing, squeezing until Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. Then the questions. "You still got that old safe in the study? Lord, these floors creak something awful. When's the last time you had the wiring checked? You really ought to think about downsizing, sugar. This big house is too much for one person." Eleanor would laugh it off at first, the way mothers do. "I'm finer than frog hair, baby. Tom and I raised you in this house. I'm not leaving till they carry me out, feet first." She'd pour sweet tea, cut a slice of pound cake, and watch Lauren pick at it like a bird, while her eyes darted to the framed photos on the mantel. Tom in his navy whites, Lauren in a cap and gown, the 3 of them laughing on Tybee Beach the summer before everything went sideways. First emotional peak. One Thursday in July, Eleanor came home early from the shop and found Lauren on her knees in the study, the bottom drawer of the roll-top desk yanked open, papers scattered like fallen leaves. Lauren startled, then flashed that megawatt smile. "I was looking for my birth certificate, Mama. Thought I'd surprise you and get some things organized." Eleanor felt something cold slide down her spine, but she only said, "Next time ask, darling," and closed the drawer with her foot. That night she moved every important document, deed, will, life insurance policies, into a new fire safe and changed the combination. She told herself she was being silly. Second emotional peak. 2 weeks later, Eleanor opened her medicine cabinet and found her nitroglycerin pills in the wrong bottle. Same little white tablets, wrong label. Her hands shook so hard she dropped the bottle in the sink. She stood there staring at the scattered pills like they were teeth knocked out in a fight. When Lauren came by the next day, all sunshine and concern, "Mama, your colour's off. You feeling okay?" Eleanor looked her daughter in the eye and felt, for the first time in her life, afraid of her own child. She started sleeping with the bedroom door locked and a chair under the knob, telling herself it was the heat making her jumpy. She bought a tiny battery camera from a spy shop over in Hilton Head, tucked it inside the hollow base of a 150-year-old mantel clock Tom had rescued from a River Street fire sale decades ago. She told no one, not her best friend Marlene, not the ladies at First Baptist, not even the Lord in her nightly prayers. She just set the clock back on the mantel, aimed the hidden lens toward the hall, and waited. Third emotional peak. Late August, Eleanor came downstairs at 2 a.m. for water and heard voices in the attic. Lauren's low laugh, a man's deeper rumble. Old wiring, old lady, old everything. One good spark and poof. Tragedy, insurance pays, we split it clean. Eleanor stood frozen on the staircase in her cotton nightgown, one hand clamped over her mouth so hard she tasted blood. When the attic went quiet, she crept back to bed, pulled the covers to her chin, and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. She didn't cry. She was past crying. She was making a plan, and that plan was about to be tested by the biggest storm to hit the Georgia coast in 30 years, because Hurricane Florence was already churning in the Atlantic, taking dead aim at Savannah, and Lauren had just called to say, "Mama, pack a bag. You're coming with me tonight whether you like it or not." The porch light flickered once, as if Tom himself were trying to warn her, and Eleanor closed the front door, turned the deadbolt, and whispered into the sudden stillness of the house she'd loved for 40 years. "Not tonight, baby girl. Not ever." The hurricane warnings started rolling in on every channel, red banners crawling across the bottom of the screen like blood. Florence had grown into a monster, a slow-moving Category 4, with eyes on Savannah and a storm surge that could swallow half the historic district. The mayor begged people to leave the low ground, grocery shelves emptied of water and batteries. Plywood went up over plate glass windows all along Broughton Street. Eleanor closed the shop early, told her part-time girl to get home to her babies, and walked the 3 blocks to East Jones, with the wind already shoving at her back like an impatient child. Lauren's silver SUV was parked crooked in the driveway, hazard lights blinking even though the sky was still the color of bruised peaches. Eleanor let herself in through the side gate and heard the shouting before she reached the porch. Lauren's voice, high and brittle, arguing with someone on speakerphone. "I told you, she's stubborn as a mule. But once the roads flood, she'll have to come with me. No, tonight. I'm handling it." Eleanor stopped under the dripping camellia bush, heart hammering so hard she felt it in her throat. The call ended with a curse and the slam of Lauren's phone against the kitchen island. Lauren came flying out the front door 10 seconds later, purse swinging, face blotchy with tears that looked real until you saw how fast they dried. "Mama!" she gasped, throwing her arms around Eleanor like she'd been waiting all day instead of plotting. "Thank God you're home. The governor just declared mandatory evacuation for Zone A. That's us. Pack 1 bag, light, we're leaving in 20 minutes. She was already pushing past Eleanor toward the hallway, fingers brushing the mantel clock as if checking it was still there. Eleanor caught her wrist. "I'm not going anywhere, Lauren." The smile froze on her daughter's face, then cracked. "Mama, this isn't the time to be proud. They're saying 6, 8 feet of water. You could die in this house. I've lived through Hugo, Matthew, Irma. Eleanor said, calm as Sunday morning. This house sat through the 1893 Sea Islands hurricane and never lost a shingle. I'm staying. Lauren's eyes narrowed, just a flicker, but Eleanor saw it, pure fury, quickly wrapped in fresh tears. Fine, she spat, voice trembling like a hymn gone sour. Die then, see if I care. She stormed back through the house, heels stabbing the heart-pine floors Tom had sanded by hand. The screen door slammed, the SUV roared to life, tires spitting oyster shells, and then she was gone. Eleanor stood in the sudden quiet, wind rattling the old single-pane windows. She felt the house breathing around her, same as it had for 40 years, and for the first time in months it felt safe again. She poured herself a finger of Tom's bourbon, the bottle he'd saved for Lauren's wedding that never quite happened, and carried it upstairs. She opened the safe, took out the new will, the trust papers, the life insurance policies Lauren had never seen, and laid them on the bed like tarot cards. Then she did something she hadn't done since Tom died. She opened his side of the closet, pressed her face into one of his old navy shirts, and let herself cry, hard, ugly sobs that tore out of her chest like splinters. When the crying was done, she was steadier than she'd been in years. She showered, put on fresh jeans and a cotton blouse the colour of river clay, and packed a small canvas satchel. One change of clothes, her blood pressure pills, the real ones, a flashlight, the bourbon, and the mantel clock with its hidden eye. Downstairs she filled 2-gallon jugs with water, grabbed the tin of homemade cheese straws Marlene had dropped off yesterday, and carried everything to the walk-in pantry off the kitchen. The pantry had thick plaster walls, a heavy cypress door, and, most important, a false panel Tom had built back when they thought prohibition might come again. Eleanor wedged herself into that narrow space, pulled the panel mostly shut, and set the clock on a crate so the lens pointed through the crack. Outside, the wind picked up to a steady moan. Rain started ticking against the tin roof of the back porch like thrown gravel. Eleanor checked the camera battery, 92%, turned the volume low, and settled in with a folded mover's blanket and the bourbon. She told herself she was being dramatic, that Lauren was spoiled and desperate but not capable of real harm. She almost believed it. At 9:17 p.m., the power flickered, died, then came back on. At 10:03, the porch light went dark for good. Eleanor's phone buzzed, a text from Lauren, 3 crying emojis and the words, "I'm praying for you, Mama." Eleanor stared at it until the screen went black, then turned the phone off completely. She didn't want the glow giving her away. Midnight came and went. The storm howled like a train that never quite arrived. Eleanor dozed in fits, jerking awake every time the house creaked or the wind found a new gap to scream through. At 1:46 a.m. she heard it. The soft scrape of the side gate against the brick path, the one that always stuck unless you lifted it just right. Footsteps, 2 sets on the wet shells. A man's low laugh, Lauren's voice hushed but unmistakable. Give it 5 minutes, let the kerosene soak in good. Eleanor's blood turned to ice water. She pressed her eye to the crack and watched the green glow of the camera feed light up her daughter's face as Lauren stepped into the kitchen, soaked hair plastered to her cheeks, smiling like it was Christmas morning. And that's when Eleanor knew, with the kind of clarity that only comes right before everything you love burns, that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one walking through her door with a red road flare in its hand. The pantry smelled like nutmeg, old cedar, and the sharp bite of fear. Eleanor sat cross-legged on the mover's blanket, knees screaming, phone dead in her pocket so it wouldn't chime or glow. The only light came from the little screen on the mantel clock, casting a sickly green wash over her hands. Outside, Florence was throwing her full weight against the house now. Rain like buckshot on the tin roof, wind howling through the chimney like a warning that came too late. On the camera feed, Lauren stepped all the way into the kitchen, dripping wet, hair stuck to her face in dark ribbons. Behind her came a man Eleanor had never seen up close, mid-30s, lean, jailhouse tattoos crawling up his neck. He carried 2 red plastic cans, the kind you fill at the marina. Lauren set a fat road flare on the counter the way another daughter might set down a birthday cake. She even gave it a little pat like it was something precious. "Start in the hall," Lauren whispered, voice low but clear enough that Eleanor felt every syllable land like a slap. "Floorboards are dry as kindling after this heat. Once it climbs the stairs, it'll take the whole second floor in minutes." The man unscrewed a cap. The stench of kerosene seeped under the pantry door so fast Eleanor's eyes watered. She pressed her sleeve over her nose and mouth, breathing shallow. On the tiny screen, she watched the liquid glug out in thick amber streams, soaking the wool runner Tom had brought home from Turkey the year Lauren turned 12. Lauren moved from room to room like she was giving a tour she'd rehearsed in her head 100 times. Dining room, parlour, the little study where Eleanor balanced the shop books every Sunday night. Each splash sounded louder than the storm. Lauren paused in front of the mantel clock, the one with the camera inside, and looked straight into the lens for a half-second. Eleanor's heart stopped. Lauren smiled, small and private, the same smile she used to give when she snuck an extra cookie and thought nobody noticed. Then she mouthed 2 words Eleanor read clear as day. "Good night, Mama." Eleanor felt the sob rise and choked it back so hard her throat burned. She would not give them the satisfaction of a single sound. The man sloshed the last of the kerosene along the baseboards in the front hall, working his way back toward the kitchen. Lauren picked up the flare, struck it against the cap. It spat to life with a vicious hiss, magnesium white at the core, angry orange bleeding out. She held it like a sparkler on the 4th of July. "Make sure the pantry goes too," she said, casual as ordering coffee. "She keeps the good silver in there, and I'm not leaving anything for the bank." The man laughed, low and ugly. "Your own mama, Law, cold." Lauren shrugged. "She stopped being my mama the day she locked me out of that trust. Blood don't mean obligation." She rolled the flare underhand across the heart pine floor. It spun once, twice, then caught the kerosene trail and whooshed into a bright, hungry line of fire that raced straight toward the staircase like it had somewhere to be. Eleanor watched the flames climb the walls, the way morning glories climb a trellis. Fast, pretty, and lethal. Heat bloomed under the pantry door. Smoke followed a heartbeat later. She felt it crawl into her lungs, thick and chemical. The camera's little green light blinked once, twice, then held steady. Still recording, still watching. The man grabbed Lauren's arm. "Time to go, baby. Let the storm cover the rest." Lauren took one last look around the only home she'd ever known as a child, and for just a second the mask slipped. Eleanor saw it, a flicker of something that might have been regret, or maybe just the realization that there was no undoing this. Then the mask slammed back down. She let the man pull her toward the side door. Their footsteps faded under the roar of the fire and the howl of the wind. Eleanor stayed perfectly still until the kitchen filled with orange light, and the smoke was so thick she couldn't see the screen anymore. Only then did she move. She pushed the false panel open an inch, felt the superheated air slap her face, and knew she had seconds, not minutes. She grabbed the mantel clock, hugged it to her chest like a baby, and crawled on her belly through the narrow space Tom had built for hiding bourbon 80 years ago. The kitchen was an oven. Flames licked the ceiling, popping and snapping like gunfire. She stayed low, lungs burning, eyes streaming. and made it to the back door. The knob was already too hot to touch. She kicked the bottom panel instead, once, twice, until the old wood gave. Then she tumbled out into the storm, barefoot, nightgown on fire at the hem, the clock still clutched in her arms. Rain hit her like ice water. She slapped at the burning cotton until it went out, then staggered across the yard, past the camellias Tom had planted the year they got married, and collapsed against the carriage house door. The fire roared behind her, eating 2 centuries of memories, one greedy mouthful at a time. Eleanor pressed her back to the wet brick, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her face, and stared at what was left of her life going up in smoke. Somewhere inside that inferno was the wool runner from Turkey, the magnolia dish, the porch light she'd left on for a dead man for 7 straight years. All of it gone, but she was still breathing, and the clock in her arms was still ticking, still recording every second of the betrayal her daughter had just lit with her own hand. Over the scream of the wind, Eleanor whispered the first full sentence she'd allowed herself since Lauren smiled into the camera. "You wanted me gone, baby girl. Let's see how you like the world, knowing exactly who set the match." The fire had its own voice now, a low, hungry roar that swallowed the storm whole. Eleanor crouched behind the carriage house, soaked nightgown clinging to her legs, bare feet numb in the muddy grass. Flames poured out of every upstairs window, painting the rain gold and red. The heat reached clear across the yard, drying her hair faster than the downpour could wet it. She could hear the old house giving up, beams cracking like rifle shots, glass exploding, the big staircase collapsing with a sound like a dying animal. 40 years of her life, Tom's life, Lauren's childhood, all of it turning to smoke and memory. Sirens wailed somewhere far off, stuck behind flooded streets and downed oaks. Eleanor knew they wouldn't make it in time. The house was already too far gone. She pressed the mantel clock to her chest and felt the tiny vibration of its gears, steady as a heartbeat, still recording, still watching. She closed her eyes for 1 second and saw Lauren's face on the screen, that little smile, the words, "Good night, Mama," mouthed straight into the hidden lens. The image burned hotter than the fire. A gust of wind shifted and blew thick black smoke straight into her face. Eleanor coughed so hard her ribs ached. She knew she couldn't stay here much longer. The carriage house roof was old cedar shingles. One ember and she'd be trapped all over again. She forced herself upright, legs shaking like a newborn colt, and limped around the side toward the alley. Every step felt like walking through wet cement. Her lungs were raw, her throat tasted of kerosene and pennies, but she kept moving. At the mouth of the alley, she could see the front of the house now, fully involved, a towering torch against the bruised sky. Neighbors stood in clusters on the opposite curb, some in bathrobes, some clutching dogs or kids, all of them staring like people watch a wreck on the highway. A woman Eleanor recognized from Bible study was openly crying into her husband's shoulder. "Miss Eleanor never hurt a soul," she sobbed. "All alone in there, Lord have mercy." Eleanor almost laughed, a cracked, broken sound that turned into another cough. All alone, if they only knew. Headlights cut through the rain. Lauren's silver SUV rolled slow down the street, hazards blinking again. She parked crooked across 2 spaces and jumped out still in the same wet clothes, hair wild, mascara streaked for effect. She ran straight to the nearest firefighter and threw herself against his chest like a grieving child. "My mama's in there," she wailed loud enough for the news crews to hear. "Please, she wouldn't leave. She was too stubborn. Oh God, please tell me you can still get her out." A reporter with a slick rain jacket and a microphone was already closing in. Lauren turned toward the camera, face crumpling on cue. "She was my whole world. she choked out. I begged her to come with me. The red light on the camera blinked. Live feed, half of Savannah watching the prodigal daughter cry pretty for the 6 o'clock news. Eleanor stood in the shadows between two azalea bushes, soot streaking her cheeks like war paint, and felt something inside her chest snap clean in two. Not heartbreak, that had happened the moment Lauren struck the flare. This was colder. This was the sound of the last thread of mother love finally burning through. She looked down at the clock in her arms. The little green light still glowed steady. Battery at 37%, plenty. She wiped rain and tears from her eyes with the back of a shaking hand, took one step forward, then another. Her bare feet left black prints on the wet sidewalk. Nobody noticed her yet. Every eye was on Lauren and the burning house. Eleanor walked right past the cluster of neighbours, past the crying Bible study lady, past the reporter shoving the microphone into Lauren's face. She walked until she stood 10 feet behind her daughter, close enough to smell the kerosene still clinging to Lauren's clothes, close enough to see the goosebumps rise on the back of Lauren's neck like someone had walked over her grave. A firefighter turned first, did a double take, mouth falling open. "Ma'am," he said, voice cracking. "Jesus Christ, ma'am." Heads swiveled, the reporter's microphone dropped an inch. Lauren spun around, eyes wide, lips parted like she was about to call for another take. Eleanor looked her daughter dead in the eye and spoke, calm and clear, loud enough for every camera and every neighbor and every lying tear on Lauren's face to hear. "I'm not dead yet, baby girl, and I've got the receipts." She held up the mantel clock, its carved mahogany face cracked from the heat, but still beautiful, still ticking, still holding every second of the truth inside. The green light blinked like an unblinking eye. Lauren's scream cut through the storm, louder than any thunder, raw and animal and too late. Eleanor just stood there in the pouring rain, barefoot and filthy and gloriously alive, while the house she'd loved for 40 years finished burning to the ground behind her, lighting up the night like Judgment Day had come early to East Jones Street. The rain kept falling, but it felt different now, like the sky itself had run out of tears and was just rinsing the smoke away. Eleanor stood barefoot in the middle of East Jones Street, the cracked mantel clock hugged to her chest, soot and blood and river mud streaking down her legs. Every flashlight, every phone camera, every pair of eyes in the crowd was locked on her. For one long heartbeat, the only sounds were the hiss of water hitting hot embers and the wet slap of the fire hoses, finally getting close enough to matter. Then the screaming started. Lauren's face went the color of spoiled milk. She took one stumbling step backward, right into the arms of a deputy who just rolled up. "Mama," she croaked like she was seeing a ghost and praying it was only that. The word cracked in half on its way out. Eleanor didn't answer. She just stared, calm as pond water, while Lauren's knees buckled and the deputy caught her under the arms. The fire marshal, a tall man named Roy Delgado, with a mustache like a push broom, pushed through the circle of gawkers. His boots squelched in the mud. He took one look at Eleanor, alive, breathing, holding that clock like it was the Ark of the Covenant, and his mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Ma'am, Miss Eleanor, you were inside?" "Most of the night," Eleanor said. Her voice sounded like she'd swallowed gravel and lightning. "Started in the pantry. I got out the back just before the kitchen flashed over." Roy's eyes dropped to the clock. "What's that?" "Proof," Eleanor answered, "every minute of it." Behind them, the roof of the Victorian gave one last groan and caved in with a whoosh of sparks that lit the rain like the 4th of July. Somebody in the crowd whimpered. A woman Eleanor had known since Lauren's kindergarten days crossed herself and started praying out loud. Phones were up now. live streaming to Facebook, to Instagram, to anywhere people still couldn't believe their eyes. Roy took the clock gently, like it might bite him. He flipped open the little brass door on the back where the hidden camera lived. The green light was still glowing. He pressed play. Lauren's voice spilled out into the wet night, tinny but unmistakable. Make sure the pantry goes, too. She keeps the good silver in there. The road flare striking, the laugh, the casual, blood don't mean obligation. The first time Lauren heard herself, she made a sound like a kicked dog and tried to bolt. The deputy had her cuffed before she made it 3 steps. Her mascara ran in perfect black rivers down her cheeks, mixing with the rain. "It's not what it sounds like," she screamed. "She's confused. The smoke, the storm. She doesn't know what she saw." Eleanor finally spoke again, soft enough that only Lauren and the people closest could hear. "I know exactly what I saw, Sugar. I watched my little girl murder the only home she ever had, and I watched her smile while she did it." The deputy read Lauren her rights, while Roy kept scrolling through the footage, jaw getting tighter with every frame. The tattooed man, turns out his name was Cody Mercer, Lauren's latest business partner, had vanished into the storm the second the sirens got close. But half of Savannah had just watched the video on somebody's phone, and Cody's face was already blowing up on the scanner groups. He wouldn't get far. An EMT wrapped a blanket around Eleanor's shoulders and tried to steer her toward the ambulance. She shook him off, gentle but firm. "I'm not leaving till I know she's in a car and gone," she said. The EMT looked at Roy. Roy nodded once. Eleanor stayed right where she was, barefoot in the mud, watching them load her daughter into the back of a Chatham County cruiser. Lauren twisted against the cuffs, hair plastered to her face, eyes wild. "Mama, please," she begged through the open door. "Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them you love me." Eleanor stepped close enough that the rain dripping off her eyelashes fell on Lauren's upturned face. She looked at her daughter, really looked, for the first time since the flare rolled across the heart pine floor. Then she said the sentence that would follow Lauren for the rest of her natural life. "I loved the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. That child died tonight. Whoever you are now, you're on your own." She turned her back while Lauren screamed her name all the way down the street, lights flashing red and blue across the ruins of the only home either of them had ever known. The cruiser disappeared around the corner toward the county jail, and Eleanor finally let the EMTs sit her down on the tailgate of the ambulance. Somebody handed her a bottle of water. She drank it like a woman who'd walked out of hell and still had the taste of smoke in her mouth. Behind her, the house settled into its own ashes, with a sound like a long, tired sigh. The big live oak in the front yard was scorched black on one side but still standing, roots too deep for even this fire to kill. Eleanor looked at it, then at the clock now sealed in an evidence bag in Roy's hand, and felt something inside her chest shift and lock into place. The worst had already happened. Everything from here on out was just paperwork and daylight. And Eleanor Voss, 62 years old, barefoot, widowed, and freshly orphaned of the only child she'd ever carried, was still breathing. That was going to have to be enough for now. Dawn came slow and grey, the colour of wet concrete. The storm had blown itself out sometime after 4, leaving the city dripping and stunned. East Jones Street looked like a war zone. Power lines down, oaks split like matchsticks. The smell of burnt pine and melted siding hanging heavy in the air. What was left of Eleanor's house was a mountain of blackened beams and brick, still steaming whenever a puddle found its way in. Fire crews moved slow, poking through the mess with hooks, making sure nothing decided to flare back up. Eleanor sat on the tailgate of the ambulance, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket. Paper cup of coffee, gone cold in her hands. They'd cleaned the soot off her face and wrapped her feet in gauze, but she refused the oxygen mask and the ride to Memorial Hospital. "I've breathed worse," she told the paramedic, and he didn't argue. She just kept her eyes on the evidence van where Roy Delgado stood, guarding the mantel clock like it was made of gold. Every few minutes another detective or deputy came over to look at the screen, shake their head and walk away muttering. Across the street, the neighbours had started a little vigil without meaning to. Folding chairs, thermoses of coffee, somebody's teenager passing out Krispy Kreme donuts from a box that had somehow survived the night. They kept stealing glances at Eleanor like she might vanish if they blinked. A few of the older ladies dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs, whispering, "Lord, she walked right out of that fire like Moses coming down the mountain." Eleanor heard them but didn't turn around. She was too busy watching Lauren. They'd moved her to a second cruiser because the first one fogged up from all her crying. She sat sideways on the back seat, feet on the wet pavement, wrists cuffed in front, hair hanging in wet ropes. A female deputy stood over her, arms crossed, rain dripping off the brim of her hat. Every time Lauren tried to stand up, the deputy put a gentle but immovable hand on her shoulder and eased her back down. The circus had thinned out some. Most of the news vans had followed the arrest footage to the jail, but one stubborn reporter from WJCL still hovered, microphone ready in case Lauren decided to give a statement. She didn't. She just kept staring at the ruins, then at Eleanor, then at the ruins again like she couldn't decide which one hurt worse. Roy finally crossed the street, boots splashing through puddles. He had the clock in a clear evidence bag now, but he carried it like it was still alive. "Miss Eleanor," he said, voice rough from smoke and no sleep, "we've got everything we need for now. Detective wants you to come in later today. Give a full statement when you're ready. No rush." He hesitated, then added softer, "I've been doing this 22 years. Never seen anything quite like this." Eleanor nodded once. "I never raised anything quite like her either." Roy glanced over at Lauren, then back. "You want me to have somebody drive you to your friend Marlene's, or the hotel the Red Cross set up over at the Civic Center?" "I'm not leaving," Eleanor said, "not till I watch them bag every nail and board. This is still my dirt." Roy looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her face stopped him. He just touched the brim of his hat and walked away. The sun finally broke through around 8:30, thin and pale, turning the puddles into mirrors. That's when Lauren made her move. She lurched up from the cruiser so fast the deputy almost lost her grip. "Mama!" she screamed, voice shredded raw. "Mama, look at me! Please!" Every head on the block swiveled. Eleanor set the cold coffee down and stood up slow, blanket slipping off her shoulders. She walked across the street like a woman walking into church on Easter Sunday, back straight, chin high, barefoot and bandaged, but steady. Lauren dropped to her knees in the puddle, right there in front of God and half of Savannah. "I didn't mean it," she sobbed. "It was Cody's idea. He said we'd scare you into signing the new policy, that's all. I swear on Daddy's grave." Eleanor stopped 3 feet away. The deputy started to pull Lauren up, but Eleanor lifted one hand just a flicker, and the deputy waited. "Stand up," Eleanor said quietly. Lauren scrambled to her feet, chains rattling between her wrists. Up close, she looked smaller than Eleanor remembered, like the fire had burned some of the height right off her. "You listen to me now," Eleanor said, voice low enough that only Lauren and the deputy could hear. "You don't get to cry on Daddy's grave. You don't get to say his name after what you did in the house he built for us. You wanted me gone so bad you poured kerosene on 40 years of memories and laughed while it burned. Well, congratulations, baby girl. You killed the house. You just forgot to kill me. Lauren's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Fresh tears cut clean paths through the soot on her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. Mama, I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't raise the dead, and it sure doesn't rebuild what you turned to ash. Eleanor looked past her to the smoking ruin, then back. But you're going to have plenty of time to practice that word where you're going. She turned to walk away. Lauren lunged, chains jerking her up short. Mama, don't leave me like this, please. Eleanor didn't stop. She didn't look back. She just kept walking until she reached the edge of what used to be her front yard, stepped over the yellow tape and stood in the warm, wet ashes that was still all that was left of home. Behind her, Lauren kept screaming her name until the deputy finally eased her into the cruiser and shut the door. The sound cut off like someone flipped a switch. Eleanor looked up at the blackened live oak, its leaves curled and crisp on one side, bright green and stubborn on the other. She reached out and touched the trunk, felt the heat still sleeping under the bark, and whispered to nobody and everybody at once. All right, old house, you gave me 40 good years and one hell of a fighting chance. Rest easy now. Then she turned her face to the pale morning sun, closed her eyes and let the light find her, alive, unbroken, and ready for whatever came next. The Chatham County Courthouse smells like old wood and despair on a good day. On the morning of Lauren's first appearance, it smelled like lightning about to strike. Eleanor walked up the wide stone steps. In a plain navy dress she'd bought off the rack at Belk the week after the fire. Nothing fancy, just something that fit and didn't remind her of funerals. Her hair was twisted back in a knot so tight it pulled at the corners of her eyes. Marlene had offered to drive her. Half the ladies from First Baptist had offered to sit with her, but Eleanor thanked them all and took the city bus alone. She wanted to feel every bump, every stop, every stranger's shoulder brushing hers, so she would remember this day was real. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with reporters, neighbours, and people who just wanted to see how far a daughter could fall. Eleanor took her seat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table and folded her hands in her lap like she was waiting on the preacher to start. She didn't look at the defense table yet. She wasn't ready. Lauren was already there, orange jumpsuit too big for her, hair scraped back, face scrubbed clean of yesterday's mascara. She looked 20 years older and 10 years younger at the same time, like the jail had peeled off every layer of pretty she'd spent a lifetime building. When the bailiff brought her in, she stumbled a little, chains clinking between her ankles. The sound echoed off the high ceiling like loose change in a tin cup. The judge, a grey-haired woman named Helen Chen, with a voice like a Sunday school teacher who'd seen everything twice, called the room to order. The charges rolled out like thunder: attempted murder in the first degree, arson of an occupied dwelling, insurance fraud, conspiracy. The list went on until the court reporter's fingers must have ached. The prosecutor, a young man named Travis Yoon, with a Carolina accent and eyes that had already stopped being surprised by people, stood up and asked for remand without bail. Miss Voss survived by the grace of God and her own quick thinking, he said, but only because the defendant believed her mother was asleep inside a house she personally doused with kerosene. This was premeditated, calculated, and cruel beyond words. The people ask that Lauren Voss remain in custody until trial. Flight risk, danger to the community, and frankly, Your Honour, danger to the victim herself. Lauren's lawyer, a slick Savannah boy named Preston Lang, with a tie too shiny for the occasion, jumped up like his chair was spring-loaded. Your Honour, my client is a lifelong resident with deep family ties. Her only family tie is sitting right there. Judge Chen cut in, nodding toward Eleanor. and that tie tried to burn her alive. "Sit down, Mr. Lang." Preston sat. Then came the part everybody had been holding their breath for. Travis turned to the evidence cart, lifted the mantel clock out of its plastic shroud, and set it on the projector table like he was handling nitroglycerin. The courtroom lights dimmed, the screen flickered to life. Silence fell so complete you could hear the old building's pipes ticking. Lauren's voice filled the room, bright and casual as lemonade on a July porch. "Make sure the pantry goes too. She keeps the good silver in there." The road flare striking, the soft laugh. "Blood don't mean obligation." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Somebody behind Eleanor started crying, loud, wet sobs that wouldn't stop. A man in the back row whispered, "Lord Jesus," like he'd just seen the devil walk in wearing his neighbour's face. Lauren watched the screen with her mouth open, eyes huge, shaking her head like if she denied it hard enough the pictures would change. When the clip ended and the lights came back up, the room looked different, like the walls had moved closer. Judge Chen didn't even look at the defense table. "Remanded without bail," she said, gavel cracking sharp as a bone. "Next appearance for arraignment, 30 days. The bailiffs moved in to take Lauren away. That's when she broke. She jerked against the chains, twisting toward Eleanor with a sound that wasn't human. "Mama!" she screamed, voice cracking wide open. "Mama, tell them. Tell them it wasn't me. Tell them you love me. Please." Every head turned, cameras clicked like a swarm of metal insects. Eleanor rose slow from her seat, the navy dress smoothing over knees that hadn't shaken once all morning. She walked the 3 steps to the little gate that separated the gallery from the well of the court, and she looked her daughter in the eye. The courtroom held its breath again. "Lauren," Eleanor said, soft enough that the microphones barely caught it, but loud enough that it rang off the rafters. "I loved you with every beat of my heart for 41 years. Tonight you get to find out what's left when that love burns clean away." She turned her back while Lauren collapsed, sobbing so hard the bailiffs had to half carry her out. The heavy doors boomed shut behind them, and the sound felt final, like a coffin lid. Nobody was ever opening again. Eleanor walked out the same doors she'd come in, past the flashing cameras and the questions and the hands reaching out to touch her sleeve like she was some kind of saint. She didn't stop until she was on the courthouse steps, sunlight pouring down hot and golden on a city that suddenly felt too big and too small all at once. She tilted her face to the sky, breathed in the smell of river and coffee and magnolia just coming into bloom, and whispered to nobody in particular, "First round's over, old house. Let's see what tomorrow brings." Because the trial was still coming, and Eleanor Voss had a wagon load of truth left to unload. 5 months later, the same courtroom felt colder, even though spring had come early and the live oaks outside were dripping with new green. The trial had been fast-tracked. Once the DA realized every news outlet from Atlanta to Charleston wanted a piece of it. They called it the Mother's Day murder case, even though nobody died. Eleanor hated the name, but she understood the pull. A beautiful daughter, a burning house, a mama who walked out of the flames, holding the proof. People couldn't look away. The jury was 7 women and 5 men, mostly grandmothers and grandfathers who'd raised their own and knew exactly how heavy love could get. They watched Lauren every day like they were trying to find the little girl she used to be and coming up empty. Eleanor took the stand on a Thursday morning that smelled like rain coming. She wore the same navy dress, washed and pressed so many times it had gone soft. Her hair was still twisted back, but a few silver strands had escaped and curled around her face like they were tired of being tamed. She swore on the Bible, sat down and folded her hands the way her own mama taught her when company came. Travis Yoon started gentle, The night of the fire, the hidden camera, the smell of kerosene under the pantry door. Eleanor answered in a calm, steady voice that carried to the back row. When he asked why she'd started recording in the first place, she didn't hesitate. "Because my daughter stopped sounding like my daughter," she said, "and mamas know the difference even when we don't want to." The jury nodded like they'd felt that same chill themselves. Then came the part everybody had waited for, the video. They dimmed the lights again and the mantel clock appeared on the screen, bigger this time, the hidden lens catching every flicker of the flare. Lauren's voice filled the room, same as before, only now it sounded worse in the daylight. "Make sure the pantry goes too. Blood don't mean obligation." The laughter afterward floated in the air like poison gas. Lauren sat at the defense table with her head down, shoulders shaking. When the clip ended, the silence was so thick you could have spread it on toast. Preston Lang stood up for cross-examination, looking like a man who'd drawn the shortest straw in Georgia. He tried the only thing he had left: desperation and addiction, bad choices, a mother who'd cut her daughter off without a dime. He held up bank statements, texts, a photograph of Lauren crying in a rehab parking lot 2 years earlier. "Mrs. Voss," he said, voice syrupy with pity, "isn't it possible your daughter was simply broken, that she lashed out in a moment of terrible, tragic weakness, that somewhere inside she still loves you?" The courtroom leaned forward. Eleanor looked straight at Lauren for the first time in months. Lauren lifted her head, eyes red, lips trembling, the picture of remorse. For one heartbeat, Eleanor saw the little girl who used to run barefoot through the sprinklers, shouting, "Catch me, Mama." Then she saw the woman who'd smiled into the camera and said goodnight before setting the house on fire. She turned back to Preston. "Love doesn't pour kerosene on 40 years of memories," Eleanor said, clear and slow, so the court reporter didn't miss a syllable. "Love doesn't swap out heart pills for sugar and wait for the storm to hide the smoke. Love doesn't stand in the rain pretending to cry while the only home you ever gave your child burns to the ground." She paused, let the words settle. "My daughter stopped being broken the minute she chose murder over asking for help one more time. And I stopped being her mother the minute I realized saving her would mean dying for her. I chose to live." A tear slid down Lauren's cheek, real this time, but Eleanor didn't soften. Preston opened his mouth, closed it, sat down. The prosecutor rested, the defense rested. Closing arguments came and went like thunder nobody bothered to hide from. The jury filed out at 3:17 p.m. on a Friday. They came back in at 3:49, guilty on every count. The foreman was a retired school principal with kind eyes and a voice that shook only a little. When he said the words, Lauren made a sound like something inside her finally snapped clean in two. She folded forward over the table, orange jumpsuit bunching around her like a collapsed tent. Judge Chen set sentencing for the following month, but made it clear 25 to life was the starting point. Then she looked straight at Eleanor. "Mrs. Voss," she said, "the court recognizes the extraordinary courage it took to sit here today. You have the gratitude of this bench and, I believe, every parent in this room." Eleanor stood up. The courtroom was on its feet too, some crying, some clapping, some just staring, like they'd seen the face of God in a 62-year-old woman who refused to burn. She walked down the aisle one last time. At the defense table, Lauren reached out with both cuffed hands, fingers grasping air. "Mama," she whispered, broken wide open. Eleanor stopped just long enough to look at her, really look, and then kept walking. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The space between them was wider than any ocean now, and nothing either of them could ever say would build a bridge across it. Outside, the sun was shining like it had never heard of storms. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, strangers reached out to touch her sleeve. Eleanor kept moving until she reached the top of the courthouse steps, same steps she'd climbed that morning 5 months ago. She took a deep breath of warm, free air, felt the weight of the past slide off her shoulders like an old coat. She was finally done wearing and started down toward whatever came next. Because the trial was over, the house was gone. The daughter she'd carried under her heart for 9 months and loved for 41 years was going away for most of what was left of her own life, and Eleanor Voss was still standing. That was victory enough for one day. The summer after the trial settled over Savannah like a soft quilt somebody forgot to shake the dust out of. Hot, yes, but gentler than the summer before. No hurricanes on the radar. Just lazy afternoons where the river smelled like pluff mud and possibility. Eleanor moved into a little 1940s cottage 3 blocks closer to the water, the kind of place with heart pine floors that creaked like old friends, and a porch swing big enough for 2 if one of them was a memory. She bought it with what was left of the shop savings and a quiet insurance check from the few antiques she'd managed to rescue from the Victorian's carriage house. Nothing grand, just pale yellow clapboards, a tin roof that sang when it rained, and a strip of yard barely big enough for what she had in mind. The first morning she woke up there, sunlight was pouring through the bedroom window, painting stripes across the quilt her mama had pieced back when Eisenhower was president. Eleanor lay still for a long time, listening to the new house breathe, waiting for the ache to hit her like it had every morning since the fire. It didn't come, not the way it used to. She got up, brewed coffee in a pot older than Lauren, and carried it out to the porch in a mug that said, "Savannah, we put the hospital in hospitality." The moving men had left a single lawn chair unfolded on the cracked concrete pad. She sat down, bare feet on the warm boards, and looked at the empty strip of dirt along the front walk. Red Georgia clay, stubborn as sin and twice as hard. Perfect. That same afternoon she drove her ancient Buick to the garden centre on Abercorn and loaded the trunk with flats of white crepe myrtles. 6 of them roots wrapped in burlap, blossoms already budding. The boy helping her load them asked if she needed a hand planting. She smiled and told him she'd been planting things since before he was born. He blushed and tipped his cap. Back home she changed into one of Tom's old navy t-shirts and a pair of cut-off jeans, tied her hair up with a scarf, and went to work. The dirt fought her at first, hard as brick, full of old oyster shells, from when this part of town was still marsh. She dug anyway, sweat running down her back, humming Patsy Cline under her breath the way she used to when Lauren was little, and napped on her chest during thunderstorms. Every shovelful felt like saying goodbye to something and hello to something else. By sunset, the 6 crepe myrtles stood in a proud little row, leaves trembling in the breeze off the river. Eleanor stood back, hands on her hips, dirt under every fingernail, and felt the first real smile in months stretch across her face. They looked small now, but she knew how these trees grew, fast and fierce, roots grabbing deep, blossoms spilling white like lace every July. In a couple of years they'd shade the whole walk and drop petals on the path, like confetti for anybody who bothered to visit. She hosed off her feet, poured herself a glass of sweet tea with extra lemon the way Tom always liked it, and sat in that same lawn chair until the sky turned peach and rose and finally indigo. Fireflies started their slow dance over the new grass. Somewhere down the street a neighbour was grilling shrimp, and the smell drifted over like an invitation. Eleanor lifted her glass to the empty swing beside her and whispered, "We made it through another one, old man." The next morning Marlene showed up with a casserole and a flat of petunias, whether Eleanor wanted them or not. They planted the petunias together along the back fence, knees creaking, laughing about the time they got caught sneaking cigarettes behind the First Baptist Fellowship Hall in 1974. Marlene kept glancing at Eleanor like she expected her to break. She didn't. When they finished, Marlene hugged her hard and said, "You're blooming again, sugar. Don't you dare stop." Word got around Savannah the way it always does. First it was just neighbours slowing their cars to wave. Then ladies from the shop started dropping by with cuttings from their own yards, rosemary, lantana, a pot of Confederate jasmine that smelled like heaven at dusk. Somebody left a porch rocker painted robin's egg blue on the curb with a note that just said, "For the lady who wouldn't burn." Eleanor sanded it, painted the arms white, and hung it from the porch ceiling with new chain. She rocked in it every evening, restored mantel clock ticking on the little table beside her, keeping perfect time like nothing had ever tried to silence it. The cottage filled up slow and steady. She hung the few photos that survived in simple drugstore frames. Her and Tom dancing at their wedding, Lauren at 6 blowing out birthday candles shaped like seashells, the three of them on Tybee the summer before everything changed. She didn't hide the pictures, she just put them where she could see them without drowning. Some nights she still woke up smelling smoke, heart racing, reaching for a little girl who wasn't there anymore. On those nights she padded out to the porch in her nightgown, sat in the swing and let the creak of the chains and the soft rustle of new leaves talk her back to sleep. The ache was still there, tucked quiet in a corner of her chest. But it didn't own the whole house anymore. It had to share space with coffee in the morning, petunias opening purple and white, the low hum of a life she was choosing one deliberate day at a time. And every time a car slowed down out front, every time somebody waved or called out, "Evening, Miss Eleanor," she lifted her glass of tea and waved back. Because the Victorian was gone, the insurance money was a lie, and her only child was counting days in a concrete room 2 hours north. But Eleanor Voss still had dirt under her nails, 6 crepe myrtles growing like nobody ever tried to burn them down, and a porch swing big enough for whatever tomorrow wanted to bring. She was home, not the one she'd planned on, but home all the same. The first real cool front of October slipped in off the Atlantic one Thursday night, carrying the smell of wood smoke and distant marsh fires. Eleanor was on the porch swing in her housecoat and slippers, a quilt pulled up to her chin, the restored mantel clock ticking steady on the table beside her like it had never seen a flame. The crepe myrtles had shot up another foot over the summer, their leaves gone bronze and gold, and every time the wind moved through them, they dropped a soft shower of colour onto the walk. She watched the petals swirl and settle, red and gold against the pale concrete, and thought about how fire and water both change things, but only one of them leaves room for something new to grow. A car slowed out front, an old habit in the neighbourhood now. The driver, a woman Eleanor didn't know, rolled the window down just enough to call out, "You still the lady who wouldn't burn?" Eleanor lifted her glass of tea in answer. The woman smiled like she'd been hoping for exactly that, eased on down the street and left the night quiet again. That was Savannah's way of saying hello these days. No need for names anymore. Just a nod, a wave, a shared understanding that some stories carry farther than any front page headline. Inside, the cottage was warm and lit low. One lamp in the living room, the little string of Edison bulbs she'd hung over the kitchen window because they reminded her of Tybee at night. The clock struck 9, soft and certain. Eleanor rocked, once, twice, then reached over and opened the small drawer in the side table. Inside lay the only letter she'd kept from Lauren, sent through the prison mail 6 weeks after sentencing. The envelope was worn soft at the edges from being handled too many times. She didn't take it out tonight. She didn't need to. She knew every word by heart. Mama, I hate what I did. I hate who I let myself become. I think about that night every single day and I still don't know how to live with it. The other women in here call me the daughter who tried to kill her mama. I don't correct them. I earned it. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know the little girl you raised is still in here somewhere, screaming to get out. Maybe one day you'll believe that again. Maybe not. Either way, I'm sorry isn't big enough, but it's all I've got. Lauren Eleanor had read it 100 times and never answered. Some hurts don't fit on a postcard, and some doors, once closed, stay that way. She left the letter where it was, closed the drawer and pulled the quilt tighter. A rustle at the steps made her look up. Marlene stood at the bottom of the porch, holding a paper bag and a bottle of sweet red wine. "Figured you might want company," she said, climbing the steps, slow, arthritis acting up with the cool weather. Eleanor scooted over and Marlene settled beside her, the swing creaking under their combined weight, like it was glad to be useful again. They sat quiet for a long while, passing the bottle back and forth, watching the streetlights come on one by one. Finally, Marlene said, soft as the wind, "You ever think about her?" "Every day," Eleanor answered without hesitation. "But it's like missing somebody who died a long time ago. The Lauren I loved stopped breathing the night she struck that flare. What's left in that prison is somebody else wearing her face." Marlene nodded like she'd known the answer before she asked. "And you?" she said. "You good?" Eleanor thought about the crepe myrtles that had survived their first winter, about the new sign she'd hung over the shop door, Voss and Daughters Antiques, even though there was only one daughter left and she'd never set foot in the place again, about the way the cottage porch felt like a heartbeat now, steady in hers. "I'm better than good," she said. "I'm still here. That's a miracle I get to wake up to every single morning." Marlene reached over and squeezed her hand. They rocked in silence until the wine was gone and the moon climbed high enough to silver the leaves. When Marlene left, Eleanor stayed on the swing a little longer. She reached for the mantel clock, ran her thumb over the carved roses Tom had loved, and felt the faint warmth of the wood against, same as the night she carried it out of the fire. Then she did something she hadn't done since the trial. She opened the little brass door on the back, pressed the tiny button that started a new recording, and spoke into the dark. "This is Eleanor Voss, 63 years old, sitting on my own porch in my own house, drinking tea that's finally sweet again. If you're listening to this someday and you think love can turn to ash and leave nothing behind, you're wrong. It leaves dirt, good, rich, stubborn dirt. And if you're willing to get your hands in it, something beautiful grows." She pressed stop, closed the door, and set the clock back on the table where it belonged. Then she stood up, stretched her back the way women do when they've carried enough, and walked inside. She left the porch light on, same habit she'd had for Tom, same habit she'd have till the day they carried her out, feet first. The crepe myrtles rustled one last time like they were waving good night. Eleanor closed the door soft behind her, turned the lock, and smiled into the quiet. She had walked through the fire her own blood set, come out the other side, scorched but whole, and planted roots anyway. Some women burn, this one refused, and that, sugar, was the end of that story, and the beginning of every good one still to come. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe, like, and share so I can keep creating more stories like this for you. Thank you.